Hi everyone, my name is Denise. You may have seen me on YouTube or TikTok, and if you haven't already, make sure you go and check out our videos so you can get even more help from us. But now that you've taken this practice quiz, what we're going to be doing is going through the 15 questions, and I'm going to be walking you through each of those questions one by one and explaining what the answers are and why the answers are what they are. I recommend for you that you pull up the answer key here in the blog. You can either print this out if you have access to a printer or just save this blog so you can come back to reference it and use this as notes for you to study from. As you can see from the answer key, we're going beyond just what the answer is, right? I'm going to be explaining why each answer is correct, clear up some of those common misconceptions, and share some exam day tips along the way so that you can spot tricky wording for exam day. We're going to dive right into question one here. All right, so what is the purpose of the declarations page in an insurance policy? So the answer to that is C. It is to summarize the key policy facts like name, coverage, limits, and premiums. So what's in the declaration page? The declaration page is your who, what, when, where, and how much, right? So the whole purpose of that is exactly what C says, right? Summarize those key policy facts like name, right? That's the who. Coverage, right? What is being covered. Limits, right? That's the how much, as well as premiums, right? That's also listed in the how much. So again, your declaration page is where you're going to find your who, what, when, where, and how much. All right, question number 2. Which of the following best describes an occurrence in a liability policy? And the answer for this one is D, an accident or continuous exposure to harmful conditions. For this one, on the exam, one that people tend to get mixed up is usually occurrence versus accident. So the key difference here between the two is accident is typically a one-time, sudden, unexpected event, right? Which is A. That's an accident. With occurrence, your key word that you want to look for there is that continuous, right? So a good way to look at that is think it's continuing to occur, right? That's what makes it an occurrence. So that continuous repeated exposure is what makes it an occurrence. Number 3, which of the following is a moral hazard? This one is C, intentionally damaging your own property for a payout. So for hazards, there are 4 different types of hazards. There are 4 different types of hazards. You have moral, morale, legal, and physical. The ones that people tend to get mixed up is moral and morale. And the only difference there is an E. So this one is a moral hazard. It's doing something dishonest or doing something criminal. Morale with the E, M-O-R-A-L-E, is negligence, right? That's not doing something, which would be B, failing to repair a broken steps, right? You're being negligent. You're saying, oh, you know what? I'm not going to do it. If somebody falls and gets hurt, the insurance company will pay for it, right? That's your negligence. You're not doing something, makes it morale. Moral is you're doing something dishonest. So a good way to remember that is think dishonesty has no E versus morale with an E is negligence, right? That's not doing something. So hopefully that helps. That little trick hopefully will help you remember the difference between the two. Question number 4, a binder in insurance is, this one I feel like people always usually get correct. This is a temporary proof of insurance, right? A binder is a temporary contract. What makes binders tricky is typically the wording of when the binder goes into effect. So that's what we have here in the answer key. The binder goes into effect not at the time of the policy, it is at the time of the application, right? So if you think about it, it makes sense, right? That binder, like we just said, is the temporary contract, right? It's a temporary proof of insurance. So that binder goes into effect immediately from the time of application. It stops once the policy is issued, right? So it's only temporary until the policy is issued. Very easy to get those questions mixed up on the exam when you're reading through those answer choices. So don't get fooled by that. It's not when the policy goes into effect, it's when the application goes into effect. All right, question number 5. What is the purpose of the insuring agreement? This one is D, to outline what the insurer promises to cover. So now we're going through the sections of the policy, right? We started with declarations. Next is insuring agreement, right? The whole acronym there is DICE, right? Declarations, insuring agreement, conditions, and exclusions. So declarations, we did that with question 1, right? That's your who, what, when, where, and how much. Insuring agreement is what the insurer promises to do, right? That's where all your perils are going to be listed. That's where the insurer promises to indemnify. So that's kind of the heart of the policy, right? So a good way to remember that one is think insuring agreement. That's what the insurance company is promising to do. We'll get to conditions in a couple questions here. Number 6. Which of the following is not covered by a personal umbrella policy? The answer here is business losses. And this is kind of a general piece of advice for the exam. One of the key differences between property and casualty questions is you have personal policies and you have commercial policies, right? So when you think about personal policies, that's a personal auto policy, right? Or a PAP. Dwelling policy, a homeowner's policy, right? They're your personal policies. A commercial is going to be a business owner's policy, right? For small businesses. Commercial package policy, right? For large businesses. So why are business losses not covered under a personal umbrella? Because they're going to need a business umbrella, right? So in general, kind of keep that in the back of your head. The same thing, perfect example is a personal auto policy versus commercial auto, right? It's a question saying, which of the following is not covered by a personal auto policy? And it's talking about a secretary doing something for her employer. Well, no, that's not covered under personal, right? Because it needs a commercial auto. So things like that, you can kind of keep that in the back of your head in general, the difference between personal versus commercial. All right, number 7. What is the difference between an open peril and a named peril policy? Of course, this is C. Open peril is going to cover all risks except what is excluded, and a named peril only covers listed risks. So another way you might see that worded is a named peril policy is going to cover what's named. An open peril policy is going to cover everything except what is excluded. Right? So you might see a little bit of different terminology. It all means the same thing, right? So a named peril only covers the listed risks, right? Listed or named. Easy way to think about that. Named, that's what it's going to cover if it's named in the policy. An open peril means that it's on an open peril basis, right? It's more comprehensive. It'll cover everything except what is excluded on the policy. If you relate this back to our cause of loss forms, our basic and our broad policies are on a named peril basis. Our special peril policy, right, things like a DP3 and HO3 and HO5, those are on an open peril basis, right? They're more comprehensive than a HO1, right, or an HO2, being that they're on a named peril basis. All right, number 8. Which type of coverage would protect a business from losses due to a building fire shutting down temporarily? This, of course, is business income coverage, right? That's exactly what it provides coverage for, right? That fire caused the business to have to shut down. That business income is going to provide coverage for that loss of income. I added on to your answer key that how long do we get business income coverage for? You get coverage for 1 year following the loss. Question number 9. What type of liability applies regardless of fault or negligence? This is your strict liability. So when we talk about strict liability, this is for products, right, or producers, manufacturers. And what this is talking about is any manufacturer, any producer that makes a product, right? There's an implied warranty that that product is safe, right? So if that product causes injury to somebody, that producer is held liable, right? Even if they didn't do anything wrong, right? That's why it's talking about regardless of fault, regardless of negligence. They did nothing wrong. They're still held liable because there's an implied warranty. I bought a product. I'm expecting it to be safe, right? That's why strict liability comes into effect regardless of fault or negligence. A good way to think about strict liability is there was a lawsuit, I think back in the 80s or 90s, with Bic lighters. So if you remember Strick and Bic, kind of rhymes. You can remember that Bic lighters, Bic being a product, right? Those lighters being a product, kind of rhymes. So Bic and strict. So again, strict liability is for any manufacturers, any producers. Number 10, in a PAP, right, or a personal auto policy, collision coverage pays for damage to your vehicle when the answer to this one, of course, is C. You hit another car or object, right? You collide with something, right? Doesn't matter if it's a car, a guardrail, a tree, right? You're colliding with something else. The only exception to this is an animal, right? Let's say you hit a deer. That would be comprehensive. That's the only time that if you're driving and you hit something, that would fall under comprehensive if it's an animal. Anything else, if you drive into another car, like I said, a building, a tree, a guardrail, anytime you're colliding with something, again, excluding animals, that's collision. Both of these, collision and comprehensive, or they might say collision and other than collision, they both fall under coverage D, which is damage to your auto, right? This is coverage when it's on your personal auto policy. This is coverage for you, right? Your own, the insured's vehicle, your own vehicle. This is not liability. This is coverage for the insured, right? This is first party benefits for the insured. So this is coverage for your own vehicle. Number 11, which commercial policy covers goods in transit? This is going to be an inland marine policy. So a good way to think about this is inland, you can think on land, right? So this is covering property anywhere that property goes while it's on land, right? So that's going to literally just follow that property. And the way the exam typically words it is it's going to cover that property while it's on and away from the owner's premises, right? So if it's a bulldozer, for example, that's being moved, right, from one job site to the other, that would need an inland marine policy, right? While it's on site, it might be covered under the property coverage, but when it's moving to the next job site, right, while it's in transit, it would need an inland marine, right, to follow it wherever the property goes. So again, if you think inland, think on land, it's following the property wherever it goes, as long as it's on land. Number 12, an additional insured on a liability policy. This one is going to be C, is added by endorsement and has coverage under the policy. And if you look at your answer key here, I give you an example. So the example I give you is about the landlord, right? Let's say a landlord is leasing a commercial space to a retail store owner. In part of that lease agreement, the landlord may require the tenant, right, the store owner, to name the landlord as an additional insured on the store's general liability policy. You might think, why would they do that? The reason they do that is because if somebody slips and falls now in that retail store, that landlord could be brought up in the lawsuit. As long as that landlord is listed as an additional insured, that's going to protect the landlord, right, under the tenant's policy. So that is what and why additional insureds come into play, right? So they're added as an endorsement, and they now are covered under that policy. You might look at D and say, well, yeah, if it's added by endorsement, they also have to pay a premium. They do, but as you guys know, with this wording on the exam, it's paid a premium by the insured, not the person who is being additionally insured. Meaning, if we look at our example that we just talked about, the landlord and the tenant, the landlord is the one that's being added on as an additional insured. He, for example, would not be the one paying the premium. The one that's paying the premium would be the store owner, right? It's the store owner's policy. He's the one that's adding the additional insured on, right? He's adding the landlord onto his policy. He's the one paying that premium, right? Not the additional insured. So that's how they kind of get you with this wording. So just best advice here, because I know this wording is tricky. Best advice is just kind of read them slowly. And if you have situations like this on the exam, which you likely will, where there's more than one answer that sounds like it could be right, always go with the most kind of concrete black and white answer, if that makes sense. That kind of, like I said, just kind of makes the most sense. And when in doubt, if you're really not sure, just kind of make your most educated guess. But I just wanted to kind of give clarity, because that kind of tripped me up too. I'm like, yeah, but if you're paying an endorsement, you would be paying a separate premium. But yes, it's not the additional insured who would be paying that. All right, question number 13, moving right along here. Number 13, indemnification. This is sort of the underlying principle of insurance, right? Why do we get insurance? We get insurance for the insurance company to pay us in the event of a loss, right? So indemnification means restoring the insured to their same original financial position. Questions on the exam that you want to look out for. With indemnification, one of the key factors is that the insurance company's purpose is not to overpay on a claim, right? So you may have a question with indemnification that says indemnification is designed to avoid what? It's designed to avoid overpaying on a claim, right? It's just to get the insured back to their same original position they were in. Right? As much as we would love to, make an extra couple thousand, right? If we get into a car accident, that's not why we get insurance, right? It's just to get us back to where we were previously. It's not for us to benefit from insurance. Number 14, which of the following best defines replacement cost coverage? So with replacement cost, kind of sounds pretty obvious once we read the definition, right? But replacement cost is the cost to replace with new or similar property without depreciation. If we read the other answer choices here, right, like A is kind of the opposite, right? So A says the cost to replace it minus depreciation, right? So if you think about that, when you're taking depreciation into account, that's your actual cash value, right? That's ACV. So ACV is A, right? That's the cost to replace it minus depreciation. Replacement cost is you're not taking depreciation into effect. It's just, what does it cost to replace it, right? That's your replacement cost. And then on the exam, you might have questions about the types of replacement cost. There's 3 of them. There's functional, guaranteed, and extended. Functional replacement cost, pretty self-explanatory in the name, right? It's going to get the building back to where it's functional, right? It might be, say, an older home that had very ornate, very custom detail, right? Very custom woodwork. Functional replacement cost says we're not going to use the custom woodwork, right, that you had previously. We'll replace it with standard woodwork. That's functional replacement cost, right? We'll get it back to a position where it's functional. And then guaranteed versus extended replacement cost. Really, the difference there is guaranteed replacement cost says that the insurance company will guarantee to pay the full cost that it costs to replace replace it, right? That's guaranteed. Extended is similar, but they put a cap on it, right? There might be a percentage. They might say, we'll pay 25% versus guaranteed. They'll pay that full amount. If it's $350,000, the insurance company will pay $350,000. If it's extended, they might say, we'll pay 25% of the $350,000. Right? So they kind of put a buffer on how much they'll pay up to. So that's the difference between guaranteed versus extended. And then lastly, number 15, we have, what is the function of the condition section in an insurance policy? This one is C. It lists the rules for both parties that they must follow for the contract to remain valid. So this kind of hits on two questions that you might have on the exam. So this, of course, is talking about the conditions section of the policy, right? So we've now hit on the declarations, the insuring agreement. Now we're on the conditions, right? So again, this is talking about the DICE, declarations, insuring agreement, conditions, and exclusions. So conditions is going to list the rules for both parties, right? What do both parties have to follow in order for that policy, that contract to remain in effect? That's your conditions, right? So what does the insured need to do to keep the policy in effect? What does the insurer need to do to keep that policy in effect? That's your conditions. The other term you might see on the exam is what's called a conditional contract, which is essentially the same thing, right? What conditional contract says that both parties must do certain things to keep the policy in effect, right? So you might see it one of two ways, right? Or both ways. So the condition section of the policy is where the insured and the insurer must, keep their duties, right, in effect. They must each adhere to their end of the bargain, basically. And then what is a conditional contract? Same concept, right? Both parties have to perform certain duties. That's what makes the agreement enforceable. Insured has to pay their premium. The insurer has to indemnify the insured in the event of a loss. So again, kind of same concept there to hit on both topics if you see both of them on the exam. So again, this detailed answer key is on the blog. Hopefully you followed along as we were going through that. But everything that I kind of touched on, you should see written out as long as you scroll down on the exam that you took. But that is what you see listed here. I hope you found that helpful. Again, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, follow us on TikTok or YouTube. Also, if you did find this helpful, we also have on our website a full on-demand program like you just watched here, where I go through every single chapter, section by section. It's over 10 and a half hours of video lessons going through chapter by chapter. We also have a full practice exam with over 100 questions with a study guide. We also have that in a bundle that also includes a video similar to this where I'm going through every single question. So if you're interested in any of that to continue your studying, you can check that link out. It is right underneath of this video. I hope you found all of this helpful to help you towards the exam, because I know how difficult this exam can be. So I'm rooting for you. You got this. Don't give up. It is possible. I know it seems like a lot, sounds like a lot, all of the above, but you got this. I'm rooting for you. Hang in there.